Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Beyond Belief, thought-provoking conversations with scientists, entertainers, academics, and others searching together for meaning and integrity in a modern world. And just before we get started, please click on that subscribe button right down there, and you'll be able to check out all the stuff that we have going on week by week and see all the fascinating people and topics that we have to offer. I'm very excited this evening to bring to you my guest, Professor Carlo Rovelli, who is a theoretical physicist and writer who works mainly in the field of quantum gravity and is a founder of Loop Quantum Gravity Theory. His popular science book, 7 Brief Lessons on Physics, was originally published in Italian in 2014 and has since been translated into 41 languages and has sold over 1 million copies worldwide. In 2019, he was included by Foreign Policy magazine in a list of the 100 most influential global thinkers. Please welcome Carlo Rovelli.
Thank you very much.
Hello, so good to talk to you.
Good evening. It's a pleasure being here.
Connection is so good. Thank God. I mentioned the book that you wrote, and it's been translated into so many languages, and it's so popular. That was not the way that I came to know you. Actually, for my birthday, my mother purchased me this book, knowing my interest in physics from a layman's perspective. And I just wanted to take one moment and compliment you on the book. It is fantastic. It is accessible, readable, fun, deep. I love the way you weave together philosophy and science and poetry, and it's really one of the best books on physics that I've ever read. And thank you very much for having created it.
Please thank your mother for me, and thank you very much for what you say.
Okay, so I have many things that I'd love to discuss with you, but let's just get a little bit of background. How is it that you got involved in physics to begin with?
Very late. I got into physics a little bit by chance. Unlikely many of my colleagues, I was not particularly keen of becoming a scientist when I was a kid or things like that. I was interested in everything. I was very curious. I was reading a lot. But I had a very restless and rebellious adolescence. I didn't know what I wanted. I knew I did not want exactly what was around me. Then I sort of I went to university. I took a long time for me to study. And during my studying years, I fell in love with physics. There was something about it being inquiry, it's being questions, addressing sort of the same big confusions that was in my adolescence. The big questions, what is reality? What is around us? What am I? It was a way of thinking capable of changing, of getting beyond what we know and making little steps ahead. And I loved it.
It's interesting because, when you and I first communicated via email, I think you were a little surprised that I was inviting you to have this conversation. I mean, it's me like coming from a theologian's perspective. And I think you were asking like, well, what do I have to do with that? And my answer to you was, that honestly, when I read your book and I hear you speak, I feel that we are on the same page somehow, and that we're both looking for the big picture and trying to make sense of the universe. And maybe we've drawn different conclusions, and maybe we come from different perspectives, but I've got to tell you that in reading it, it feels very similar, the search. And the methodology, I understand, may be different, but it's interesting for me to note that that I find this time and again, I find that the wonder that scientists and mathematicians express for the physical world feels and sounds similar to the wonder that I think theists express for the same stuff. And you have worked specifically in the realm of time. And you say in your book that the nature of time is perhaps our greatest remaining mystery. And so I'd like to ask you why. Why do you say that? And then another deeper question, which is, what is time?
The entire book tries to address
I
it.
know.
First of all, yes, wonder has been always sort of a source of what I've done, and wonder is a source of curiosity. When you wonder, then you want to know more. And I do understand what you said at the beginning. I do believe we're different. I mean, we believe we belong to different tribes, to different cultures. But that's but there are resonances. And when you introduce this program, it's the program says searching for meaning and integrity. And while I was hearing that, I thought, yeah, that's what I'm doing also a little bit. What I wish I were at least I'm doing. Now, I've been interested in time because um, of the specific work in physics that I do. I work in one of the big open problems at the core of modern physics, which is merging the discoveries about space-time of Albert Einstein with the other great discovery of last centuries, which is quantum physics. And this requires modifying the way we think about time and space. And somehow, let me put it this way, it is a surprise studying physics to discover that the way we usually think about time is it's insufficient, it's incorrect, it's an approximation. It's not wrong because it's good for our everyday life, but time actually works differently than what we usually think. For instance, as I say at the very beginning of the book, of my book about time, the time that passes in the mountains is actually more than the time that passes near the sea, down in the valley. So if you or your twin brother are separated, and one goes to live up in the mountains, one lives down, when you meet, one of the two has actually lived more time. I mean, his clock has ticked more time. He had more time to think. A little bit. It's very small, this difference. But it's a bit shocking because it tells us, well, time does not work the way we thought it works. And physics has discovered that repeatedly. So there is a number of things we know about time, very concrete, very measurable, very clear, that tell us that our usual idea about time is not very good. It's approximate. It's like, thinking that the Earth is flat. It's not really flat. It's flat at our scale, but then it's round. But then this doesn't stop here, because it's not that, studying physics, you say, oh, good, I have understood. That time doesn't work this way. It works another way. Because in trying to make sense of how time works, there are things we don't yet understand clearly. And there are open questions. And these open questions are connected with a lot of other open questions that we have in science. How life starts, what is consciousness,
right?
So there's a network of related beautiful open problems which are fascinating.
Yeah, but so you highlighted time. I actually wrote this down as a question. You highlighted time as the greatest mystery, and for me, the origin of consciousness, the origin of matter, the origin of life, maybe are on equal par. But would you say there's a particular reason why time supersedes all of those as the greatest mystery?
No, I mean, it's a greater mystery because when you get enamored by something, that's the greatest mystery for you. I mean, it's I wouldn't object to somebody else saying that something else is the greatest mystery. I guess one thing that makes the mystery of time peculiar is that it appears to be connected with the rest, in a sense.
Yes.
In whatever we do, we seem to have clashing with this strange things we don't understand about time. So I don't know if it is the greatest mystery, but certainly it is a pervading mystery that arrives to various. You see, I view our knowledge as an island of things we know, with a lot of dark space around which we don't know.
Sure.
And wherever we look and in direction we don't know, there's something about time that comes in.
I drew as a conclusion from reading the book, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that time doesn't exist, or at least doesn't exist in any regard in the way that we generally think of it. Is that fair to say? Is it going too far to say it doesn't exist at all?
No, I would disagree with the first thing you say, and I would agree with the second thing you said, namely, I think time exists, or focus exists, right? I have a watch here, and I use it to organize my life, and we have a certain number of minutes for our conversation, and so on. So time exists, real. We're not making a mistake when we talk about time, but we are making a mistake when we think that this idea we have about time is general, is universal. It's something that, the entire universe works according to the idea of time that we have. That's a mistake. So time does not exist at a fundamental level. If I want to give a description of the universe, which is good enough not just for talking about what I'm doing tomorrow, but also for talking about how galaxies work, how atoms works, then certainly the notion of time we use, it's totally inappropriate, and perhaps we should give up entirely, perhaps talking about time. You see, to say that something doesn't exist at the fundamental level doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, period. For a physicist who think that everything is made by atoms, at the fundamental level, there are no cats, right? So the universe is not made by cats. It's made by atoms and maybe other stuff.
Yes,
electric field, maybe other stuff. And cats just are a particular combination of things. And in a sense, time is like cats. It's a peculiar, the time of our experience, it's a peculiar phenomenon that it manifests itself around us in a certain way, but it's not universal. And if I may add one thing, Rabbi, you ask what is time, and it's a very hard question to answer. I mean, the entire book is about that. But I think that the one good direction to answer is not to think that it's a single thing. What we call time, and we know what we're talking about when we call time. Actually, it's not one thing. It's a very structured notion with a lot of layers that has a lot of properties, some of which are out of the world, some depend on our brain, some are truly general, some are not general at all, depend by our approximation. So to understand time, we have to break it apart. The fact that the future is different from the past is something. The fact that it's universal is something. The fact that it flows is something. And each one of these features of time has to be reviewed or understood where it comes from.
Obviously, there's a very intimate relationship between matter and time. Would you say it's fair to say that time itself had a beginning?
One of the striking aspects that we do understand about time is that it does not work as a single line.
Right.
The idea that so that's one of the direct intuitions we have about time. Right, time is a line. There's now, yesterday, the day before, the day still before, tomorrow, the day after, and we can. Time is a collection of instant, and we can put them all in order, which come first and which come. And that's the simplest intuition about time, and it works very well in our life. And we all together are in the present. We all together move to next day, and then we all together move to. And certainly, time, it does not work like that. And one reason I already said, I mean, if two persons are in different places, time go at different speed for them. But there are other aspect of it. The notion of a present. We're all in the same present. It's largely illusory. It's largely an approximation. We have a sense of a present for a very contingent reason, is that light travel very fast. Both if I look around me, and even if we look to one another through a computer and radio waves goes very fast. So I look at you, and if you think for a moment, I don't look at you now because it takes time.
Sure.
So I'm looking at you in the past, and you are looking at me in the past. So we are not in the same present. We're a little bit out of phase one from another. Now, if you were in a different planet or a different galaxy, it wouldn't be a few milliseconds different. It would be weeks or years different. Yes. And so the notion of present would be completely extraneous to us. We wouldn't talk about present. We would talk about, when I receive your message, when you receive your message. And in fact, if we try to extend the notion of present globally, we fail for technical reasons. It's just impossible to define a present in the universe. It makes no sense. So the question, what is happening now on a distant galaxy, it's literally a meaningless question. We can say what happened in the past in a distant galaxy. We can see it. We can talk about the future when they will see us. But in between, there's a long period, which is neither past nor future, and in a sense is all present. So this means that time is not a line. So yes. Asking about the starting point, it's tricky, because we should think about time as a more diffuse thing. Every region has its own, every path has its own beginning, its own end. So it's a much more multiple thing than a single thing, time. Now, because the universe as a whole seems to be originated from a Big Bang, a moment in which, but we don't really know. I mean, that's my job, to study the Big Bang. And it's not that we know that there was a Big Bang. We know that at some point the universe was very compressed, very hot, very small, so to say. But what happened before that, we don't know. We're not even clear whether it makes sense to say before that, precisely because there is not a common time. So the question of the beginning of time is, strictly speaking, we don't know. We just have no idea.
Fair enough.
And more in general, we're not even sure it's a well-posed question. Time is something that might have a beginning.
Okay. So obviously, there you go. Interesting. Obviously, from a theological perspective, of which, I strive to bring a little bit, and looking for synthesis between these ideas, there was a Jewish philosopher from the 13th century named Nachmanides. And he wrote about the book of Genesis.
Is that the one I would call Maimonides?
No, I know you quote Maimonides in the book, as I recall. And I love the quote that you.
We're talking a different person. Okay.
It's a slightly later in history.
Okay.
And he said, interestingly to me, that time only took hold. That's how he describes it. He said, when matter comes into existence, time then takes hold, implying, from his perspective, that there was no time prior to matter. And of course, he views the universe as having been created in a Big Bang-like description, where he describes that the entire universe was at one point condensed into the size of a mustard seed, which must have been very, very strange to consider in the Dark Ages. But nonetheless, there it is. And so it's just fascinating to me that a long time ago, it seems that it was possible for some people speculated, or some people felt that they had knowledge about the nature of time and how it came into existence. Again, I understand that that's an unknown from a scientific perspective, but at least from a Judaic perspective, that's precisely what took place. And without science to buttress me, I can't prove it scientifically, but I do again think that the pursuit it overlaps. So as you said, has resonance in some arenas. I'm sure you're familiar with the concept called the cosmological argument, which attempts to trace back an origin to. I know you've studied philosophy, and it shows in your writing. But just for the benefit of the audience, I would just like to outline it for 1 second and just get your reflections on it. There's three simple premises to it. The first one is that everything that begins to exist has a cause of its existence. Premise two is the universe began to exist, and therefore the conclusion is the universe has a cause of its existence. And I know within philosophy, causality and Hume, and there's all kinds of speculation about the nature of causality. Aristotle. Do you have any feelings about this from a philosophical perspective? Do you feel that this could be philosophical evidence of an origin of time?
No, not really. I think that when you quote, again, let me break in two parts this thing you're asking me. When you quoted this idea that time starts when matter starts, I think this is a deep idea that one can find sort of reappearing in the history of thinking. And it's particularly important, this idea, I think, today, because the idea of time as something that exists by itself, independent from things, from matter, it's not ancient. In fact, it can be traced mostly to Newton. The previous way of thinking about but this idea that has become so ingrained in ourselves that we consider it natural. But I think it's a case in which scientific thinking has permeated the reality. There's an alternative idea about time, which is time is not a thing. It's not something that exists by itself. There's no time period. Time is just the name we give to the happening of things.
Right.
So what really is going on is that things happen, and we call this happening time. And I find this a better way of approaching the question of what time is, because it avoids posing questions that might be meaningless. And if this is so, and this is an idea that I'm not surprised that is in the Middle-aged Jewish tradition, because it's certainly there. One can find it in a number of Jewish of Middle-aged figures. It can be found in Aristotle. Aristotle defined time really at the counting of events.
Right.
So then, if nothing happens, there is literally no time, which is an idea unusual to us, but I think pretty convincing. Namely, what is convincing that thinking about time in this way might be more effective. So if there's no matter in a very large sense, then there's no time, because there's nothing happening. If there's no something subjected to change, there is no. So the beginning of time is also the beginning of happenings, and asking before things starting to happen, there was time, might be a wrong questions. Like saying, this house has 4 rooms. What about the 5th room? Well, there isn't. So there's no point to talk about that.
Right.
Now, the second point you made. Let me. If we talk in terms of logical terms or transcendent terms, I can follow you. But if I try to tie the beginning of time that the physicists may talk about with the beginning of time, say of the Genesis, of the
Yeah.
big Bible, I think we
Right.
make a mistake. That's my take. And let me tell you something in the Catholic tradition,
Yeah.
which is the fact that when the scientists came up with the idea of the Big Bang, the Pope rapidly jumped into it
Hmm.
and gave a famous speech. This is Pius 12, if I'm not confused, uh, connecting and saying, look, the scientists are finding the Big Bang and the creation. This is a confirmation of the Bible.
Right.
Or the confirmation is a bad word. It's coherent with the Bible. And there was one of the greatest scientists, was a Catholic priest and a good theologian, a great scientist, George Lemaitre,
Hmm.
who actually stopped the Pope from that. He went to Rome and convinced him to get out of this logic, and I think it was completely right, arguing that it's mixing levels too much, because it might very well be, and in fact, look, it's going on right now. About that was in the 2030s. So a century later, scientists are studying the actual possibility that before that Big Bang, there was something else.
Hmm.
And then you should rewrite the Genesis saying light goes on and no light was turn on again. I mean, it wouldn't work. So I think it's a risk to try to connect too much contingent discovery about how the universe actually work with much more general arguments like the one you were making.
Okay. Um, let's talk about particles for a second. You had mentioned particles before. So, I have a couple of quotes that I'd like to bounce off of you and get your take on them. The first one is by the physicist Paul Davies, from an article he wrote entitled "Particles Do Not Exist," in which he says, "We find that the particle concept is nebulous, and ideally it should be abandoned completely." And then another one, John Gribben, was quoted as saying, "We call those objects particles for want of a better name. What they really are, we do not know. The particle concept is simply a crutch ordinary mortals can use to help them towards an understanding of mathematical laws." Um, you agree, disagree, seem
I,
accurate? Is that
I
the
agree
right way to think
completely.
about it?
I agree completely. Paul Davies is completely right here, and in fact, I know exactly what he's referring to. But he's also right in a large sense. The sort of the version that we understand the world in terms of space with little particle bouncing around, and this is what particle physics is about, elementary physics is about, is just wrong. Because of quantum mechanics, because of quantum field theory, because of modern physics. Those particles are something that are very vaguely related to our notion of what a particle is. We know what is a grain of sand. We know what is a little stone. We know what is a little particle of powder that we find here. Nothing to do with that. These are things that can dissipate, spread around, becomes cloud, become jump. They're more similar in their behavior to waves on a lake, if anything. But that's also a metaphor that doesn't capture the full thing. So, and in fact, they're an approximation. They are exactly an approximation. They are roughly they're particle-like. And in fact, if the experiment at CERN, as I see these little tracks and so you say, okay, this is a particle because it has left little sign of its passage. But so there's a wave to leave sign of its passage, and if you look carefully and closely, there is no particle there. So the world is far more complicated at the light of modern physics than a simple picture of space with matter moving around. There are fields, quantum fields. I think that's a sort of naive materialism.
Right.
Sort of 18th century picture of the world, Laplace,
Right.
which modern physics has has contradicted. I am, I'm a naturalist. I'm a materialist in the sense that I think that what is out there is the kind of thing that we can, one way or the other, hope to study using physics, using biology, using science in general. We might have an access to questions, and I tend to believe, and this might be a difference between us, I tend to believe that all questions can either be somehow addressed in this way, or they might be, we might just declare that we don't know. I mean, I'm very happy to say that I don't know about so many things.
That's good. That's a good trait.
But
I strive for that also.
yeah, but certainly science is not giving the naive materialistic picture, which was the one of the 18th century. I mean, a little bunch of the universe is not a little bunch of particles of stones bouncing around. It's far more complicated than that.
Okay, so so we're having this dialogue. You're kind enough to listen to my perspective, and I realize that as a scientist, probably, a theological perspective is difficult to digest. But nonetheless, for the audience and for the, I want to. So let me just share from the heart for a second, regarding these discoveries of yours and what you're contributing to in the world. When I look at particles, and again, I have no in-depth understanding of them at all. I have a total layman's understanding. I read books designed for laymen, and so on and so forth. With all that said, it seems to me subjectively that when we look at particles, when we look at matter, more deeply and more deeply, the less of it seems to actually be there. The more theoretical it becomes, the more like information it becomes. So that's on the one hand in terms of physical reality, and in terms of time, the more cloudy it seems to become when you try to pin that down as well. And I can only reflect for anybody out there who has a similar theological bent as I do, and if for anybody, just we're having a discussion. That seems to point more and more towards what might be described as a spiritual, a metaphysical reality, as opposed to a physical reality. And by metaphysical, and I'd like to just quote Noam Chomsky for 1 second, who, when asked what is metaphysics, and it is on YouTube, you can see it, and he says, well, physical refers to things that we know, and metaphysical refers to things that we do not yet know. So, whereas the cell phone would have been considered a metaphysical device at one point, the way I, again, subjectively view metaphysics is something that hasn't fully been discovered yet, although I know that modern physics talks about 10, 11 dimensional universes. And for me, that means something that's beyond the normative physical universe. The catch-all phrase for all this, to me, when you look deeply in matter and see that it's not exactly there, and when you look deeply into time and see that that's not exactly there either, and when I consider that, at least in the Hebrew language, that the word for God that we have is the word was, is, and will be, all at the same time, right? Beyond time, space, and matter. Is it not possible, since you freely admit that we don't have answers to everything, is it not at least possible that there is some overarching force that brought physical reality into existence? Is it not a logical possibility? And I'm not trying to convince, with the caveat again, I'm not trying to convince you of anything.
Yeah, no, sure, of course, we're not trying to convince one another or anything. It's I listen to you, and let me try to react. First of all, so a few things. First of all, I think science, it's to a large extent recognizing things we don't know. And this, in this sense, I think the common idea of science as the pretension of knowing things, it's wrong. I mean, science starts precisely in the moment in which we say we don't know, and in fact, the more you learn, the more you realize things you don't know first. So I do see mystery all over, a lot. Second, you're right, totally right, that if on the one hand, there's no doubt we have understood scientific thinking has understood unbelievable things which are true and real and without doubt. I mean, the Earth is round and goes around the sun, etc., etc. And Darwin understood that we have common ancestors with the animals, and we have understood how atoms works and galaxies, an incredible number of things that have been clarified and allow us to do things. But if this has come with a great simplification, a few big laws and things like that, it's not that it has made everything simple, not at all. And the overall picture is not simple, it's not definitive, it's not clear. And in a sense, we look a little bit out the window, we look behind the hill, and wow, we discover marvelous things that we don't know yet. Newton was perhaps the greatest scientist of all. And there's a fantastic letter we have of him at the end of his life. I mean, few people have discovered so many things about nature like Newton. Everything, optics, mechanics, mathematics, calculus.
Yeah.
And in his letter at the end of his life, he says, I don't know how the others are going to look at me, but I see myself like a kid playing along this beach with little stones, happy of having found some beautiful stones in front of the ocean of our ignorance.
I've heard that. I love that.
Yeah, it's a wonderful quote, and I think it's science at its best. I mean, it's just the recognition of them. So I'm very close to you in many things you say. What separates us is that if you were in a discussion, I would ask you, how can you know something beyond what we don't know? I mean, of course there is things we don't know, but why? On which ground are you hoping to know something that we don't know? It's not that I pretend to know how time begins, but how could you pretend to know how time begins?
Yeah.
So I think scientific attitude, what I would call a scientific attitude for me, it's not pretending of knowing the answer. It's just in a sense questioning answers which are out there giving, and I don't see on which ground they're reliable.
Okay. So I don't know if it's accurate or not. In your Wikipedia page, it describes you as a quote unquote serene atheist. And
I've said that, and this has been picked up by people, and I've seen this quoted more than one time. Yes.
Okay. So I don't claim to speak for you in any regard, but it sounds like the last couple of things that you were saying puts you more in the agnostic camp. Slightly, not 100% as definitive as hard atheism. Is that fair, unfair? Because I was going to ask you a follow-up question about your serenity. I'll let you answer first.
No, I would not describe myself as agnostic, because for what I said before, somehow I really don't find. Let me backtrack a moment. Atheism means not believing that there is God. That's a definition somehow. Well, believing that there is no God. Stronger.
Right.
Well, do I believe that there is no God? Let me put it in a different way. I was born in a country where the large majority of population say that they believe there is God. So, of course, I heard God all over. In various traditions, I've moved to countries where there is even more religious people. But every time I ask people, what do you mean by God? And I do that because I've been sincerely curious about that. My friends, my colleagues, or a person like you, I get a different answer. I get a deeply different answer, not a simply different answer. And every time I ask what does God means for you, or what you think, whether the answer regards personal interior attitude or a cognitive, people say also different things. So do I believe that they're all wrong? Well, no. I mean, of course I don't believe that they're all wrong. Many are very right. For instance, when I don't want to reduce God to that, but when a person talks about their own relation with being alive, with life, with the others, with the universe, and give their, what were the special use, searching for meaning and integrity, the name of this, call this God, well, then I believe in God, of course. So if God is meaning, I believe in meaning. I think that there is meaning. Maybe I'm curious to understand as a scientist where this meaning is rooted in my culture, in my biology, in my brain, in my. But then
in reality,
exactly. But then if I take specific, if you ask me, do I believe there's an old man with a beard? Of course, no. But I suppose you don't either. If you ask if I believe that there is a person who is a creator, I don't believe so. If you ask if I believe in the God of Spinoza, well, yeah, that's easy because that's how can a scientist not believe in the God of Spinoza? That's
sure, the totality of whatever is. Yeah.
Right. And there is a sort of immanentism, pantheism in some Judaic tradition, which is. But how can one be atheist? How can one not believe in something which is so unclear? That's so I'm an atheist. At that point, I mean, it's just what am I not believing in?
It's not the purpose of our discussion right now, but I'll throw it out to you as a friendly invitation. Should you ever want to hear humbly a more definitive answer on the nature of what that is, I would be delighted offline to have that discussion with you. I would find it very enriching. But you're totally correct, and I hear it all the time. Like, if one's definition is flawed, of course, I'm not going to believe it. That's not how I look at it either. And you're right again that there are many definitions of it. However, I do think that there are some rigorous philosophical presentations that at least would resonate with you as a intelligent, intellectual person, that are worth looking at. They are certainly part and parcel of Western culture and part of our history as a people, and are worth knowing. And if you're interested, I'll send you a book. But that's. So I wish we had time. I wish we had time to get more into it, because that's really meaty in terms of the discussion. But it would take a bunch of steps, I think, to arrive at a satisfying place. Sorry, what were you going to say?
If I may, you will go that way, not through a rational path, not through a emotional. I don't mean emotional in a negative sense. I mean in a positive sense. There is two of the great scientists of the 20th century. One was Georges Lemaitre that I mentioned before, and the other was probably the greatest after Einstein, which is Dirac. Mm-hmm. Dirac was an atheist. In fact, it's one of these cold, the quintessential of the scientist that is only equations. But he was a kind person, and he appreciated Georges Lemaitre enormously. And once told Lemaitre, trying to be kind with him, and he himself reported his conversation in an article. He said, Lemaitre, you're a priest, and you are a cosmologist, and you should be great for you to work in science, a part of science which is cosmology, which is so close to your religion. And Lemaitre says, no, that's the science which is far away from my religion. And Dirac was surprised by that. I said, "What do you mean? I mean, is there a science which is closer to your religion?" And Lemaitre said, "It's psychology," and I think he meant it in a way which I think is deep. It's not superficial. It was not at all trying to degrade the religions in any sense. He was sort of saying, don't look for your religion outside, but look inside. Look in the subject and not in the object. Look in the way you perceive the world in you, and that's where you. I'm the last person on planet who can talk about God.
Well, we're doing it. We're having that conversation.
Well, yeah, and I'm very happy to. I'm very happy to have it. And of course, I have an immense. Let me say it openly. I'm serene atheist, but I have an immense respect for everybody who's religious. I have no sense of neither of the respect nor of lack of intellectual respect at all. Absolutely. I do realize that we're different in the way we view the world, we organize the world in our thinking, we make sense of the world. And I think that this variety, it's a richness of humankind, not a problem.
You quote a couple times the book of Ecclesiastes in your book, which I really appreciated. And you quote a very deep. The whole book is deep, but you quote a particularly unquoted, not very often quoted line, which is, "Before the silver cup cord snaps and the golden bowl crashes, the jar is shattered at the spring, and the jug is smashed at the cistern." And you understand correctly that is referring to the moment of death, and and seems to most people that would be a bleak line. And I was surprised and impressed by your, I guess it's your serenity. Most people, when they view the end, especially if they view an end that's literally the end with nothing coming afterwards, I would think would be upset. What I think that they would walk around very dour and downcast, and to quote Freud, who was also he was an atheist, not a serene atheist. He was an upset atheist. Said the moment a man questions the meaning of life, he is sick, and it leads to sadness and depression, because of course he believed that there was no meaning of life. How do you avoid getting downcast, or at the prospect of coming to a like your golden bowl shattering and coming to a complete cessation of existence? Does that not bother you on any level? Do you have children? Does it bother you, the idea that you're just never going to see them again and that's it? Like, how does that affect you?
Look, first of all, that book is one of the greatest books written by humankind. I think it's just
me too.
Every single line is just it goes so much deep in what it means to be human, and
yes.
the trouble of being what it means to be human. I think that I can only speak for myself and for myself now. So I don't know if next week I get the COVID and I end up in a hospital and I face I hope not, thank you. I face death and then I panic and I scream, no, I don't want to die. And there's a baby. I mean, maybe that's what happened. But I'm not a kid anymore. And slowly the fear of death has decreased in me. I mean, it was not particularly strong when I was a kid, and has decreased steadily, I would say, by growing. Because I don't think that you mentioned meaning, and Freud saying there's no meaning. For me, my atheism doesn't mean that the universe is without meaning. The universe is full of meaning, and I am meaning, and I produce. We all produce meaning. We have desire. We have good and bad desire. We have noble and non-noble desire. So there is sense in life, but there is a sense which I think doesn't need to be nourished by the future. It can be nourished by the present. And of course, we do things for the future. Am I sad of the idea of one day not seeing any more of the people I love? Of course I am. But there's so many things that make me sad. I wish I could. I mean, we have limits, and we accept our limits.
Right.
So I literally think that the fear of death is overplayed in our culture. In our culture, I mean, in for several number of centuries,
Right.
even millennia. Some other cultures, or in antiquity, people weren't so afraid of death. I mean, life makes sense precisely because it's short, because it's precious, because it's beautiful, because it's intense. Again, maybe tomorrow I will be, overwhelmed by fear. But no, I think that if right now somebody would come to me and say, "Look, you can eat this pill and live forever," I would say, "No, thank you." I mean, life is beautiful, but it's also full of pain.
Mm-hmm.
It is. It's a fact.
It is. It is.
And it's unavoidable. We lose things we love. We don't get things we would like to. It's a balance, and I find it's for some people it's very hard. So some people it's easier. It's not the same for everybody, but it's beautiful as it is. I wouldn't want to continue it, neither in an after death nor in an eternal being alive. So I think I'm serene with respect to death, and I think that in my book I quote the sort of an Indian poem where it says that it's surprising that people don't think that they are mortal. But maybe people don't think that they are mortal because they don't care. After all, they live for the day. And look, in the Bible, there isn't much worry about what's going to happen after, right? I mean, most of the characters of the Bible worried about their life, not what's going to be after life. It's just not an issue.
Yeah, no, that's a good observation, and I think that is supposed to be the focus. And I'm very pleased, to hear you talk about Ecclesiastes, and maybe just mention one other quick idea and then wrap up, which is, that the book says over and over again, it talks about the futility of life, right? And it says there's nothing new under the sun, nothing new under the sun. All rivers lead into the sea, but the sea is never full. The ear is never satisfied by hearing, the eye by seeing, blah, 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 right? And it paints a bleak picture on the one hand, right? Nothing new under the sun, right? And I think that's what you were riffing on a little bit in the book. You're pointing out what is being pointed out, what is true. And I just like to give our audience one additional way of looking at it. That there's a logical inference that if there's nothing new under the sun, then perhaps there is something new above it. And that's the difference in my mind. That's the Noam Chomsky, the difference between physics and metaphysics. Yes, under the sun, we have this rotation that goes on forever and ever. And maybe we can't achieve ultimate meaning, but maybe there is something beyond the sun, and maybe, and I do have hope and maybe belief that someday people like you and your colleagues in the physicist world are going to produce the evidence of those worlds that are beyond ours. And I think maybe that will be a day of great celebration when religion and science hold hands and march forward, which is certainly the way I would prefer it. I have a great love of both. But I just wanted to thank you for taking the time for being here and for speaking to me so openly and so truthfully. I hope you have enjoyed it as much as I have, and I hope we can stay in touch in the future.
Very much so, and I'm very grateful of this invitation. Thank you very much.
Okay, so join us again next week on Beyond Belief with more great programming, more amazing people, deep ideas. Thank you so much for being here.